The Mind Gym Academy presents The Student Who Controlled the Storm, a story of emotional regulation and self-control. Chapter 1. The Explosion. Amber always felt it before it happened. It started like a slow burn, a tightness in her chest, the heat crawling up her neck. Her fingers curled into fists before she even realized it. Her jaw locked. And then, boom, the explosion. It happened in small ways at first. A loud sigh, a sharp glare, a huff under her breath. But it never stopped there. Because when Amber got frustrated, she didn't just feel it. She let everyone else feel it too. That morning, the day had started fine. For once. She had actually remembered to bring her homework. She'd even woken up on time. No major disasters. And then, math happened. She hated math. Not just mildly disliked. No, hated. With every part of her being. And now she sat at her desk, staring at the same stupid problem she had been trying to solve for the past 10 minutes. If a train is traveling 60 miles per hour and makes 3 stops, each lasting 5 minutes, how long will it take to reach a city 200 miles away? Amber gritted her teeth. What did a train's schedule have to do with her life? When would she ever need to know this? She pressed her pencil to the page and wrote something random just to move on. Mr. Smith walked past her desk, glancing at her paper. Amber, take another look. You're rushing. That was it. That was all he said. And yet, it triggered the storm. Her face grew hot. I've already looked at it 100 times. I don't get it. I won't get it. Why does he always have to correct me? Before she could stop herself, she slammed her pencil down. Hard. A few students turned. Some whispered. Amber could feel their eyes on her, which only made it worse. What's the point of this? She snapped, shoving her textbook away. It slid across her desk, knocking over her water bottle. The room went silent. Amber's heart pounded. She knew this moment too well. It was always the same. Her emotions took over. She lost control and then... regret. But right now, she didn't care. This class is impossible, she muttered, shoving her chair back. She grabbed her notebook, ignoring the side glances from her classmates, and stormed out. Amber walked fast. Down the hall, past the lockers, past the classroom doors, until she reached the bathroom. Her breathing was heavy. She didn't have to look in the mirror to know what she'd see. Frustration written all over her face. Why does this always happen? She ran the sink, splashing cold water on her face. The worst part? She wasn't trying to be this way. She didn't want to be the girl with the temper. The girl who snapped, who got mad over little things. But it felt like she had no control over it. It was like a storm. Building, swirling, until it exploded. And once it hit, she couldn't undo it. When she finally walked back into class, everyone pretended not to notice. But they did. They always did. Amber slumped into her seat, keeping her eyes down. Mr. Smith didn't say anything. He just kept teaching. That made it worse. She expected a lecture, a look of disappointment, a warning about controlling her emotions. Instead, when the bell rang, Mr. Smith slid a small note onto her desk. Come see me after school. Amber crumpled the paper in her hand, shoving it into her bag. Great. Another lecture. After school. The unexpected conversation. Amber dragged her feet to Mr. Smith's classroom after the final bell rang. The door was already open. He sat at his desk, calmly grading papers, like she hadn't caused a scene just hours ago. She walked in, but didn't sit down. If you're about to tell me to control my emotions, don't bother. Mr. Smith didn't look up from his papers. That's not what I was going to say. Amber crossed her arms. Then what? Now he looked up. I was going to ask if you've ever seen a snow globe. Amber blinked. What? Mr. Smith reached into his desk and pulled out a jar filled with water and glitter. Amber stared. That's not a snow globe. He smirked. Close enough. He held it out. Shake it. Amber hesitated, but curiosity won. She grabbed the jar and gave it a hard shake. The glitter swirled wildly, spinning in every direction, making it impossible to see through. "This," Mr. Smith said, tapping the jar, "is your brain when you're angry." Amber frowned, watching the chaotic swirl. "Okay?" When we're upset, our thoughts race, our emotions take over, and we can't think straight. Just like the glitter in this jar. It's all over the place. Amber tilted the jar, still skeptical. "And?" Mr. Smith smiled. "Now, just let it sit." They watched as little by little, the glitter began to settle. The water became clear again. Amber felt herself relax without even meaning to. Mr. Smith folded his hands. "You ever notice that when you get angry, you react instantly? But if you just wait a few seconds, breathe, it doesn't feel as bad?" Amber shifted in her chair. She thought about the storm she always felt building. Maybe he had a point. She didn't say anything. Mr. Smith leaned back. "I'm not asking you to never get angry. I'm just asking you to try this next time you feel the storm coming." Amber raised an eyebrow. "You want me to carry around a glitter jar?" He laughed. "Nope, just picture it in your mind. Let the glitter settle before you react." Amber rolled her eyes. "It's not that easy." Mr. Smith nodded. "It's not. But neither is always losing control, is it?" That part hit differently. Amber didn't respond, because for the first time, she wasn't sure if she had an argument. Chapter 2. The Jar of Glitter. Amber wasn't convinced. Sure, the glitter jar thing made sense, in theory, but real life wasn't like some slowly settling jar of sparkles. Real life hit fast. It was messy, loud, and annoying. People pushed your buttons, and you couldn't just sit there and wait for the glitter to settle. Still, something about what Mr. Smith said stuck with her, and that was annoying too. The next morning, Amber walked into class determined to stay calm. She even took a deep breath before sitting down, just in case. It lasted 4 minutes, because then she saw Ethan. Ethan, the guy who had an opinion about everything. Ethan, the guy who never stopped talking. Ethan, the guy who thought he was always right. And lucky her, Ethan was her assigned partner for a history project. "You can do the slides," he said immediately without even looking at her. "I'll handle the research. That's the most important part anyway." Amber's grip tightened on her notebook. Seriously? He was just deciding that? The glitter in her mind started to swirl. She could already feel herself about to snap, to argue, to tell him off, to remind him that he wasn't the boss. And then she saw it. The jar, not the actual jar, but the one in her mind. She imagined it shaking, spinning, swirling. She took a breath. And another. And just like that, the glitter started to settle. She didn't slam her notebook down. She didn't snap at Ethan. She didn't even roll her eyes. Instead, she calmly said, "Actually, I'd like to do some research too. We should split it." Ethan looked at her as if expecting her usual reaction. When it didn't come, he just shrugged. "Fine, whatever." Amber blinked. That's it? No argument? No fight? She had been so used to fighting battles she didn't need to fight. But now she realized that sometimes the battle wasn't even real. Sometimes people weren't pushing back. She had just been pushing first. The real challenge. Later that day, Amber found herself in a real test. Lunchtime. And the last available seat was next to her younger brother, Noah. Amber sighed. Great. She loved her brother. Really. She did. But ever since he started high school this year, he had been annoying in new ways. Like now, when he was chewing way too loudly and talking to his friends about some video game he wouldn't shut up about. It was one thing at home. But at school? In public? That was another thing entirely. Noah turned to her, grinning, completely unaware of how infuriating he was. "Hey, Amber, do you know how to—" "Noah," she cut in. I'm literally trying to eat." He hesitated, then shrugged and turned back to his friends. The moment passed, but Amber still felt annoyed. The glitter started swirling again. She could have let it take over. She could have rolled her eyes, shoved her chair back, moved tables just to make a point. But instead, she did something else. She imagined the jar. The glitter settled, and so did she. The test of time. The day wasn't over yet. Amber walked into English class feeling proud of herself. She had made it through 2 major emotional challenges, Ethan and Noah. And then, she got her graded essay back. A big, ugly C sat on the top of the page. Her stomach dropped. This was the essay she had actually tried on. The one she had stayed up late writing. The one she had thought was good. Her fingers curled around the paper. The glitter swirled. She felt the storm coming. She could already hear herself arguing with the teacher. She could already see herself crumpling the paper and throwing it away. But then, the jar. Let it settle. Amber forced herself to take a breath. And another. By the time she looked back down at her paper, she wasn't happy. But she wasn't about to explode either. Instead, she flipped to the comments section. "Good ideas, but needs stronger examples. Try connecting your conclusion back to your introduction." She read the feedback instead of letting the grade define her. And when class ended, she did something she never would have done before. She walked up to the teacher, and instead of saying, "This grade is unfair," she asked, "How can I make it better?" Her teacher smiled. "Now that's a great question, Amber." A lesson worth keeping. That night, Amber sat on her bed thinking. She reached into her bag and pulled out the actual glitter jar, the one Mr. Smith had given her. She stared at it for a long time. And then, just to test something, she shook it. She watched the storm inside swirl, fast and chaotic. Then she set it on her nightstand and waited. She watched as, little by little, the glitter settled. And for the first time, she realized something. She wasn't just learning to control her own storm. She was learning to weather it. And that was even more powerful. Chapter 3. The first real test. Amber was getting better at controlling the storm. Not perfect. Not even close. But better. It had been a few weeks since Mr. Smith gave her the glitter jar, and she had practiced using it. Imagining it in her mind, letting the glitter settle before reacting. And it worked, most of the time. But today was different. The fire drill that wasn't a drill. Amber was halfway through her chemistry test when the fire alarm blared. Her pencil jerked across the page, heads snapped up. A few students yelped. Then came the usual reaction, people groaning, laughing, already reaching for their bags. Another drill. But Mr. Lopez's face said otherwise. "This isn't a drill," he said, standing quickly. "Everyone, let's go." Amber felt the first twinge of panic. Her stomach twisted. It wasn't the fire itself that scared her. It was the uncertainty. Was it serious? Was it small? Were they safe? The not knowing made her heart beat faster. She moved with the class, filing into the hallway. But by the time they reached the exit, the crowds made it worse. Hundreds of students, pushing, talking, moving, the noise, the shoving, the heat. Amber's hands clenched. She couldn't breathe. The glitter jar in her mind started shaking. She felt the storm building. She needed space. The moment she almost lost control. Outside, students were everywhere, scattered across the lawn, some joking, some confused. Teachers giving instructions. Amber tried to breathe, tried to let the glitter settle. But she couldn't. Because then, Ethan. Because of course it was Ethan. He was laughing, nudging his friend, talking way too loudly. If this school actually burned down, at least we'd get out of finals. Amber snapped. She whipped around before she could stop herself. "Ethan, can you shut up for 5 seconds? People are actually worried." Ethan blinked. "Geez, relax. It's probably just a toaster fire." And that was it. The storm took over. Amber felt the words coming, the ones that would cut, the ones that would tear him apart, the ones she would regret later. But then, a voice. Amber. Not Ethan. Mr. Smith. She turned, her breathing fast, shallow. But he wasn't scolding her. He wasn't giving her that disappointed look. He just tapped his wrist like a watch, a reminder. Amber knew what he meant. Time. Let the glitter settle. Her hands shook, her heart pounded. But instead of letting it explode, she turned away. She closed her eyes, and she waited. 5 seconds, then 10, then 20. Her breathing slowed, and the storm? It passed. The aftermath. They were allowed back inside within an hour. Turned out it wasn't a real fire. Someone in the cafeteria had burned a tray of chicken nuggets. Amber could have laughed at how ridiculous it was. But she didn't, because she was still thinking about what almost happened outside, how close she had been to losing it, how easy it would have been. And yet, she didn't. She had let the storm pass. The conversation that changed everything. Later that afternoon, Mr. Smith stopped her in the hallway. "Hey," he said, nodding toward her. "You okay?" Amber shrugged. "I mean, I didn't yell at Ethan, so that's a first." Mr. Smith smiled. "And how do you feel about that?" Amber thought about it. The truth? Weird. She had spent so long reacting, letting her emotions dictate her actions, that it felt unnatural to just pause. Like she had lost the fight before it even started. "I don't know," she admitted. "It's like I let him win." Mr. Smith shook his head. "You didn't let him win. You won." Amber frowned. "How?" "Because you didn't let him control you." She hadn't thought about it that way before, but he was right. Ethan hadn't won anything. He was still the same obnoxious, loud kid. But she had won. She had stayed in control. Amber crossed her arms. "It's still hard." Mr. Smith chuckled. "Of course it is, but storms don't disappear overnight. You're just learning to ride them out." Amber looked away, but she was smiling. Just a little. The realization. That night, Amber sat on her bed, pulling out the glitter jar. She shook it, watched the chaos, and waited. She realized something. Before, she used to think anger was power. That snapping back, yelling, proving a point, that was control. But it wasn't. Control wasn't about reacting. It was about choosing not to. And for the first time in her life, Amber felt like she actually had a choice. Chapter 4. The Real Challenge. Amber had controlled the storm. Once, maybe twice. But she knew it wasn't over. She knew herself too well. It was easy to stay calm when things were small. A comment here, a grade there, a minor annoyance. But what about when things really went wrong? That test was coming. She just didn't know when. A test of patience. Amber sat in history class, waiting for her grade. She had actually studied this time. Stayed up, read the notes, tried to focus. She wasn't expecting a perfect score. She wasn't delusional, but she thought she did okay. Mr. Johnson started passing the tests back, one by one. When he got to her desk, he set the paper down face down. That was never a good sign. Amber flipped it over. D+. Her stomach dropped. She felt the heat rising to her face. The glitter jar in her mind shook violently. She had studied. She had actually tried. And this was what she got? She could feel it happening. Her hand clenched around the paper. She was about to snap. She could already hear herself saying it. "This is ridiculous. You have to be kidding me. This is so unfair." Her mouth opened. And then, the jar. Let the glitter settle. She forced her fingers to unclench. She took one breath, then two. She looked at the teacher's comments instead of the grade. "Good effort, but weak thesis. Need stronger argument. The frustration was still there, but now it had somewhere to go. Instead of fighting, she took the paper and slid it into her backpack. Maybe she would ask for extra help. Maybe she wouldn't. But at least she wouldn't storm out. Small win. The bigger test. But the real test? It wasn't a history exam. It came later that day. At lunch, Amber was in line grabbing a sandwich when she heard it. The voice. Cassie. Amber and Cassie had been best friends once. Before everything changed. Before Cassie started hanging out with different people. Before she became someone who gossiped more than she talked. Amber wasn't sure when they had gone from laughing at inside jokes to barely speaking. But now, Cassie's voice rang out loud and clear. She's always got an attitude, Cassie was saying. No wonder people avoid her. Amber froze. She didn't have to ask who Cassie was talking about. The glitter jar shook violently. Her fists clenched. The words were right there. She had 100 things to say. She could go off. She could humiliate Cassie in front of everyone. She could remind her of every flaw, every mistake, every dumb thing she had ever done. It would be so easy. But the jar, the glitter. Amber closed her eyes. Let it settle. She didn't say anything. She just walked away. The aftermath. Amber didn't feel powerful. She didn't feel victorious. She felt small. Like she had lost. Like Cassie had won. But then something happened. Later that day, Amber was at her locker when she heard a voice. Hey! She turned. It was Sarah. Sarah was quiet, a little awkward, never in the middle of drama. Amber frowned. Hey! Sarah shifted her weight. I saw what happened earlier, at lunch. Amber stiffened. Yeah? Sarah nodded. You didn't say anything, even though you could have. Amber let out a short, humorless laugh. So what? Now I look weak? Sarah shook her head. Nope. It was kinda cool. Amber blinked. Cool? Sarah nodded. Most people would have lost it, but you didn't. That's rare. Amber didn't know what to say. She had felt small, but maybe what she did was bigger than she thought. The lesson in the storm. That night, Amber sat on her bed, staring at the glitter jar on her nightstand. She picked it up, shook it, watched it swirl, and then she waited. She let it settle. And she finally understood. For the first time, she realized she had been wrong about strength. For years, she thought strength meant being the loudest, the toughest, the one who always had a comeback. But real strength? Real strength was self-control. Real strength was knowing when to fight and when to walk away. She wasn't perfect. She never would be. But she was learning. And that felt like something worth holding on to. Chapter 5, Passing It On. Amber had learned to control the storm, most of the time. She still felt it. The fire, the rush, the temptation to snap back. But she was starting to realize something important. The storm didn't control her. She controlled it. And today? Today, she would finally see just how much she had changed. The hallway meltdown. It started in the hallway between classes. Amber was grabbing a book from her locker when she heard sniffling. She turned. Haley! Amber frowned. Haley never cried. Hey! Amber said, shutting her locker. What's wrong? Haley wiped at her eyes, shaking her head. Nothing. Amber wasn't buying it. Haley. Haley sighed. It's just Cassie. Of course it was. Cassie had moved on from talking about Amber to talking about Haley. And Haley, unlike Amber, wasn't built to handle that kind of attention. She said I was pathetic, Haley mumbled. Said no one really liked me, that they just felt sorry for me. Amber's fists clenched. The storm rose fast. She wanted to turn around, march straight into the cafeteria, and let Cassie have it. She deserved it. Every part of her body screamed to defend Haley. But then, the glitter jar. the storm settled. Not because Amber didn't care, but because she did, because she had been here before, and she knew exactly what Haley needed. Shake the jar. Amber took a breath, then another. Then she reached into her bag, pulled something out, and handed it to Haley. Haley frowned, looking down at it. "What is this?" Amber smiled. "Shake it." Haley hesitated but did as she was told. The glitter spun wildly. The chaos. The mess. The frustration. Exactly like how she felt inside. Amber let her watch it for a second. Then she said, "Now, just wait." They stood there in silence as the glitter began to settle. Haley sniffled. "Okay, I don't get it." Amber chuckled. "That's you. Right now. Your emotions are swirling and everything feels messy. But if you let it settle, you'll see clearer." Haley stared at the jar. She didn't speak for a long moment. Then quietly, she said, "I hate that it makes sense." Amber laughed. "Yeah, me too." Haley smirked, wiping the last tear from her eye. "Can I keep it?" Amber nodded. "Yeah, just pass it on when someone else needs it." Haley held the jar like it was something precious. Amber knew exactly how she felt. The realization. That night, Amber sat in her room, staring at the empty spot where her glitter jar used to be. She could have kept it. She could have gone back to Mr. Smith and asked for another one. But something told her she didn't need it anymore. Not because she wouldn't get mad again. Not because she had perfect control. But because the lesson wasn't about the jar. It was about what it meant. About what she had learned. She had learned that she didn't have to explode. She had learned that she had a choice. She had learned that walking away wasn't weakness. It was power. And most importantly, she had learned that her strength wasn't just for her. It was for others, too. Because calming your own storm is one thing, but helping someone else calm theirs? That was real strength. And Amber? She was finally strong. Final message, the lesson in the jar. Amber's journey wasn't about never getting mad. It was about learning to wait, to pause, to breathe, to let the glitter settle. And once she learned that, she realized something else. She had the power to help others do the same. Because everyone has storms. Some just need a reminder that they don't have to face them alone. Chapter 6. The lesson that stayed. Amber had changed. Not in a huge, dramatic way. She was still Amber. Still sarcastic. Still stubborn. Still rolling her eyes at things that annoyed her. But something inside her was different now. She could feel it in the way she reacted. Or rather, the way she didn't. Because the storm didn't own her anymore. She had learned how to pause. She had learned how to breathe. She had learned how to let the glitter settle. And that changed everything. A reminder in the mirror. One morning, Amber stood in front of her bathroom mirror, brushing her teeth when she saw it. The old Amber. Not in her reflection, but in her little brother, Noah. He was standing behind her, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, his face tight with frustration. "What's up with you?" Amber asked. Noah exhaled sharply. "Mom said I can't go to Jake's house until I finish my homework." Amber raised an eyebrow. "Did you finish your homework?" Noah hesitated. "Not all of it." Amber smirked. "Then maybe that's why." Noah groaned, gripping the bathroom counter. "It's just so annoying. Why does it even matter if I do it now or later?" Amber recognized the feeling. The way his shoulders tensed, the way his jaw clenched, the way his storm was starting to swirl. For the first time, she wasn't the one trapped in the storm. She was the one watching someone else struggle through it. So she did what Mr. Smith had done for her. She didn't tell Noah to calm down. She didn't say he was overreacting. She just walked over, reached into the cabinet, and pulled out a glass cup. Then she filled it halfway with water. Noah stared. "Okay? You think I'm thirsty?" Amber smirked. "Just watch." She grabbed the salt shaker from the counter and poured some in. "All right," she said. "Now drink it. Noah made a face. Ew, no. Why not? Because it's disgusting. Amber nodded. Exactly. The salt is like your frustration. It's there and it's real. But right now, it's all you can taste. If you only focus on that, it's overwhelming. Noah folded his arms. So what am I supposed to do? Ignore it? Nope. She grabbed a bigger glass. A much bigger one. Then she filled it almost to the top with fresh water. And then she poured the salty water in. The salt was still there. But now, it was so diluted that you could barely taste it. This is what happens when you give yourself time, Amber said. The frustration is still there, but the more you let it settle, the less intense it feels. Noah blinked. So you're saying I should just drink more water? Amber rolled her eyes. No, Noah. I'm saying if you step back, breathe, and wait, your problem won't feel as big as it does right now. Noah stared at the cup, then at her, then back at the cup. That's actually kind of smart. Amber smirked. I have my moments. And with that, Noah grabbed his backpack and walked off to do his homework. No more complaints, no more frustration, just a lesson learned. When it truly mattered. A few weeks later, Amber got to experience the ultimate test of what she had learned. She was walking through the halls when she heard it. Cassie. Again. Honestly, I don't get why people act like she's changed, Cassie was saying. Amber's still the same angry girl she's always been. She just hides it better now. Amber stopped. Her chest tightened. The storm tried to rise. But then, she thought about Noah and the saltwater glass. She thought about Haley and the glitter jar. She thought about Mr. Smith's words. You didn't let him win. You won. Amber didn't snap. She didn't storm in and prove Cassie right. She just took a deep breath, and she kept walking. Cassie's words? They were just salt. And Amber? She had too much fresh water to let them ruin her day. Full circle. That afternoon, Amber found herself back in Mr. Smith's classroom. This time, she wasn't there because of an outburst. She wasn't there because she was in trouble. She was there just to talk. Mr. Smith glanced up as she stepped inside. Amber, to what do I owe the pleasure? Amber smirked. Just figured I'd check in. Mr. Smith leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. You ever think about how different this conversation would have been a few months ago? Amber laughed. Yeah. Then she pulled out her phone and showed him a picture. It was Noah, holding up a cup of water, rolling his eyes but grinning. Amber shrugged. Turns out your lessons are contagious. Mr. Smith chuckled. That's how change works. Amber sat down across from him, thinking about everything that had happened. The storm she had faced. The times she had won against herself. The times she had helped others win too. And for the first time, she understood something. This wasn't about a glitter jar. This wasn't even about anger. This was about control. About the choice to pause instead of explode. About realizing that emotions don't have to own you. And once you learn how to calm your own storm, you can help others do the same. What Amber learned. Amber had spent years thinking she had no control, that her emotions dictated her actions. But she learned something powerful. Emotions don't have to control you. You can pause, breathe, and let the storm settle. You don't have to react instantly. You can choose your response. And once you learn to calm your own storm, you can help others do the same. That's what real strength looks like. And Amber? She was stronger than ever.